February 1945. Morning light spread over the Pacific like a pale sheet of steel. Below, the volcanic island of Iwo Jima smoldered. Black sand beaches were scarred by shellfire. Mount Suribachi rose through drifting smoke, its slopes still contested by Marines fighting yard by yard. High above 20,000 feet, the steady hum of B-29 Superfortress bombers filled the sky. Long silver wings cut through thin clouds as they moved toward Japan. Their bomb bays were heavy with payloads meant for factories and cities far beyond the horizon. From the north, small dark shapes climbed rapidly, Japanese fighters. Interceptors sent to probe the bomber stream. Fuel was scarce, aircraft were worn. Pilots were often young and recently trained. One fighter approached the edge of the formation. No immediate firing, just parallel flight for a few moments in the cold air. A subtle tilt of wings, a gesture sometimes seen between aviators who understood the risks of altitude, weather, and distance from home. Inside the bombers, gunners watched carefully. They had seen aggression many times before, but not every encounter began with gunfire. In those high skies over Iwo Jima, the air war carried meanings beyond tactics alone. By early 1945, Iwo Jima had become a critical node in the Pacific War. The island's volcanic terrain and strategic location made it a forward base for Japanese fighter operations and early warning radar stations. Its proximity to the Japanese mainland meant that U.S. bombers flying from the Marianas could be intercepted, and the Imperial Army and Navy were determined to make the airspace costly. The U.S. Army Air Force's 21 Bomber Command relied heavily on the Boeing B-29 Superfortress for its long-range strategic bombing campaign. These aircraft, capable of flying over 3,000 miles fully loaded, were the cutting edge of American aviation. Bombing missions targeted industrial facilities, oil, refineries, and airfields on Honshu and other Japanese islands. Each sortie carried hundreds of men in tight crews, operating under high-altitude conditions. With oxygen masks, frost forming on cockpit windows, and engine temperatures constantly monitored to avoid failure, Japanese fighter defenses, meanwhile, had become increasingly desperate. Pilots were often inexperienced, trained in compressed courses, and flying aircraft that had been patched together from scarce resources. Aircraft like the Mitsubishi A6M0, once dominant, now faced B-29s that were faster, heavier, and protected by armed formations of gunners. The challenge was immense: intercept without being destroyed, inflict damage, and survive. The stage for repeated high-altitude encounters had been set. Bombers moved in tight formations, their gunners alert. Japanese pilots climbed toward them through freezing layers of air, engines straining, fingers numb from cold controls. Both sides understood the lethal stakes, but despite the mechanical and tactical complexity, small human gestures, like salutes or wing rocks, occasionally punctuated the relentless grind of war. This mixture of advanced technology, harsh environment, and human endurance defined the air battles over Iwo Jima, setting the conditions for moments of unexpected humanity. By February 1945, Japanese air defenses were stretched thin, The once rigorous pilot training programs had been curtailed by war attrition. Many pilots were barely out of flight school, some only teenagers, thrown into combat with minimal experience. Fuel shortages meant fewer practice flights, and maintenance difficulties left aircraft more prone to mechanical failure. Yet the pilots carried a weight far heavier than fuel tanks or ammunition. The cultural and moral expectations of Bushido, honor, courage, and self-sacrifice were drilled into every aviator, shaping not only how they fought, but how they faced the possibility of death. On the American side, B-29 crews had undergone rigorous training in formation flying, gunnery, and navigation. Their missions were long, often lasting over 12 hours, with exposure to freezing temperatures, oxygen deprivation, and constant alert for anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters. Crews worked in close quarters, with gunners stationed along the wings, nose, tail, and top turrets. Coordination and discipline were paramount. A single misstep could cost lives or compromise the mission. Despite technological advantages, American crews were not immune to the psychological strains of war. Witnessing flak bursts, smoke trails, and the occasional fighter slicing past could provoke fear. Yet experience and training conditioned them to maintain composure. Commanders emphasized restraint, only fire when necessary, maintain formation, and remember the primary objective, the target. This backdrop, desperate Japanese defenders and disciplined American bombers, created a unique environment. Airspace above Iwo Jima became a theater where life, death, and human emotion intersected. Within this framework, even brief, non-violent gestures like wing rocks carried profound significance, offering fleeting acknowledgement across enemy lines. It was in these moments that the human element of warfare became most visible, setting the stage for encounters that would linger in memory long after the engines fell silent. High above the volcanic ridges of Iwo Jima, the human toll of the air, war became immediately apparent. B-29 gunners, young men barely out of training, peered through sights and scopes at the approaching silhouettes of Japanese fighters. Their hands were cold from altitude. Oxygen masks constricted the jaw, and every heartbeat carried tension. The enemy pilots, some mere teenagers, climbed through freezing air, engines roaring, aware that a single miscalculation could end their lives. Letters and post-war interviews with surviving bomber crews describe a mixture of fear, fatigue, and almost clinical focus. Moments when Japanese planes approached without immediate aggression created dissonance, a pause in the expected cycle of attack and defense. The gunners noticed subtle wing movements, small gestures that conveyed acknowledgement, almost like a silent code shared between men who knew the risks. For Japanese pilots, these encounters held their own psychological weight. The combination of exhaustion, minimal fuel, and cultural expectation intensified every decision. Maneuvering alongside massive B-29 formations demanded skill, but also courage shaped by the Bushido ethos. Mistakes could be fatal, hesitation could be dishonorable. Some pilots later recalled moments when they glimpsed the faces of gunners through gun ports, or the open turrets, fleeting human recognition that interrupted the constant calculations. of survival and attack. These human dimensions, fear, discipline, and fleeting empathy, underscored the war in the sky as more than mechanical conflict. In brief exchanges of acknowledgement, humanity surfaced, reminding both sides that behind every aircraft and every machine lay fragile, living beings. Bushido, the traditional code of the Japanese warrior, framed the mindset of Iwo Jima's fighter pilots. Honor, courage, and loyalty were paramount. Survival was secondary to duty. Yet, by early 1945, the brutal reality of war clashed with these ideals. Young pilots, often undertrained, faced modern American aircraft and overwhelming firepower. They were expected to fight relentlessly, even when fuel was low or aircraft damaged. American bomber crews, in contrast, operated under strict procedural discipline, trained to complete missions efficiently while minimizing unnecessary casualties. Their focus on strategy, precision, and survival contrasted with the Japanese emphasis on personal honor. When a Japanese pilot maneuvered near a bomber formation without immediately engaging, the unspoken acknowledgement of skill and endurance created rare moments of mutual respect. Returning a salute or performing a wing rock gesture over the bombers became more than a signal. It was a moral recognition of shared humanity. A brief suspension of hostilities in an otherwise brutal environment. For some Japanese pilots, seeing their risk and skill acknowledged without immediate attack provoked a profound emotional reaction. Reports note that a few were visibly shaken, even moved to tears. These gestures highlighted the intersection of culture and combat ethics. Warfare demanded action, yet cultural understanding and personal codes allowed fleeting human connections to emerge above the violence. In the harsh skies over Iwo Jima, moral recognition became a silent language bridging to sides locked in. A deadly struggle. February 23, 1945. Morning broke over Iwo Jima with a cold, thin light filtering through low clouds. B-29 Superfortresses climbed steadily, their silver wings reflecting the muted sunlight. Bomb bays were heavy with ordnance destined for industrial targets on Honshu. Crews adjusted oxygen masks and scanned the skies, anticipating interception. From the north, Mitsubishi A6M0s and occasional Ki-61 fighters began their ascent. Engine roars cut through the wind, and the Japanese pilots, tense and precise, closed in on the bomber stream. Gunners gripped their Browning .50 calibers, ready for the sudden flash of attack. As one Japanese pilot aligned parallel to a bomber formation, no immediate engagement occurred. He executed a subtle wing rock, a standard aerial gesture among aviators signaling recognition or respect. Inside the bomber, a gunner noticed, then another, and soon the formation's disciplined response mirrored the salute. Wings tipped slightly in return. The moment lasted mere seconds, but it was profound. Japanese pilots, trained to expect death or fire, were met instead with acknowledgement. Some lowered their heads briefly, hands tightening on controls, and reportedly a few were moved to tears at the gesture. Airborne observers described the formation as unusually still for a combat zone. Engines hummed, but the usual tension, the instinctive twitch to fire, was suspended. These rare exchanges occurred amidst a backdrop of technical precision, frozen clouds, and lethal altitude. The human element, carefully interwoven with discipline and skill, emerged here in the sky. For a brief instant, enemy and ally recognized each other not as instruments of war, but as pilots, human beings suspended between survival and duty. As the B-29s pressed onward toward Japan, these encounters repeated along the formations path. Multiple Japanese fighters approached at varying altitudes, often breaking off without firing after a brief parallel pass. Pilots on both sides reported noticing the precise discipline required to maintain formation in such extreme conditions: wind shear, turbulence, and sub-zero temperatures at 25,000 feet. Inside the bombers, gunners documented the unusual calm. Observers noted that some Japanese pilots would momentarily rock wings, tilt aircraft slightly, or execute small loops, subtle, deliberate gestures that American crews interpreted as salutes or acknowledgments of skill. Flight logs and post-war interviews confirm that a few young Japanese aviators openly wept after such encounters, overwhelmed by fear, exhaustion, and the recognition that their adversaries adhered to a code even amid destruction. The psychological impact on bomber crews was also significant. Witnessing these reactions reinforced the human cost of war. Men who had trained for months to destroy enemy targets found themselves confronting vulnerability in the enemy. Discipline and respect coexisted with tension and danger. These fleeting gestures carried weight beyond the moment. They symbolized mutual understanding in a theater defined by annihilation. The recognition of bravery and humanity in a deadly encounter became a turning point, not in terms of bombs dropped or aircraft destroyed, but in how the participants remembered the war, and how historians later interpreted these aerial exchanges. Above Iwo Jima, the war continued. Yet in those seconds, humanity cut through the roar of engines and the threat of gunfire, leaving a memory that endured far beyond the Pacific sky. By March 1945, the Battle of Iwo Jima had reached its conclusion. The island itself was under full American control, but the legacy of the air battles above remained. B-29 crews returned to bases in the Marianas, recounting missions where Japanese pilots, despite the desperation and attrition of their air force, had acknowledged skill and courage with subtle gestures. These moments were recorded in mission reports, letters, and oral histories, preserving evidence that combat could include human recognition. Even amid destruction. Japanese pilots who survived these engagements often faced the next mission with heightened fear and introspection. Many were acutely aware that they had encountered opponents who could have fired immediately, but chose restraint for brief moments. Post-war interviews confirm that some were moved to tears, not out of surrender, but from a combination of relief, exhaustion, and recognition of mutual skill. For American crews, these encounters created a complicated emotional landscape. Training emphasized mission success and survival, but witnessing human vulnerability in the enemy challenged simplistic notions of heroism. Veteran memoirs describe a mix of awe and sadness, a respect for the adversary tempered by the reality of ongoing warfare. even as the island became a staging ground for further operations. These episodes contributed to a broader understanding of war. Discipline, courage, and humanity coexisted in the sky, creating lasting impressions that extended beyond the strategic and tactical outcomes of the campaign. The experiences over Iwo Jima had a lasting effect on both sides. Surviving Japanese pilots, many of whom were teenagers, carried memories of those wing-rop gestures and salutes for the rest of their lives. They had faced overwhelming odds, limited resources, and cultural expectations of honor, yet in fleeting moments, they encountered restraint and acknowledgement from their adversaries. For some, it became a defining memory of the war, a reminder that even in total conflict, recognition of skill and humanity could persist. American crews returned to their bases, completing debriefs and mission reports. Officers documented the interactions carefully, noting both tactical outcomes and unusual behaviors. Historians later used these records to understand not only the strategic dimensions of the bombing campaign but also its human impact. Casualty reports, flight logs, and oral histories from veterans all corroborate that these moments, while brief, were real and emotionally charged. The moral weight of these encounters shaped post-war reflections. Veteran interviews reveal that many bomber crews remembered these gestures more vividly than enemy losses or bombs dropped. They spoke of the tension, the fear, and the brief recognition of courage across enemy lines. It became clear that acts of humanity, however small, resonated far beyond the immediate battlefield. This shared recognition also influenced post-war narratives of aerial warfare. Scholars noted that the late Pacific air battles, despite their scale and devastation, included moments where discipline, respect, and ethical conduct tempered the violence. The acknowledgement of enemy skill became a subtle, yet enduring, form of victory, a quiet testament to the resilience of human conscience in war. War is measured in victories, losses, and territories seized. Yet the air battles over Iwo Jima remind US that history is also shaped by fleeting acts of recognition and humanity. In the thin, freezing skies, American and Japanese pilots confronted not only technology and strategy, but the fragile reality of human life, wing rocks and salutes. Above the Pacific were more than gestures. They were acknowledgments of courage, skill, and shared vulnerability. For the young Japanese aviators, these moments punctuated a campaign defined by desperation, loss, and cultural duty. For American crews, they provided unexpected clarity. Discipline and skill could coexist with compassion, even in the midst of combat. Veterans recalled these encounters long after the war, testifying that such human exchanges left a deeper mark than any mission success or tactical advantage. These episodes challenge how we understand warfare. They suggest that even in a conflict engineered for destruction, ethical behavior and mutual recognition remain possible. The story of pilots crying in recognition of returned salutes is not a tale of triumph in the conventional sense, but a testament to the enduring presence of conscience, courage, and empathy amidst violence. Ultimately, the skies over Iwo Jima reveal a quieter victory, one measured not in bombs or territory, but in human connection and respect. Even in war, compassion can survive. And sometimes, it is in these subtle, fleeting moments that history remembers the most.